You're watching The Legal Breakdown. Glenn, we've got breaking news here. It didn't take long for Donald Trump to be dealt his first major loss of his presidency. Can you explain what just happened here in court?
Yeah, Brian, big news. The honeymoon is over because a federal court judge has already stepped in and stopped one of Donald Trump's most potentially dangerous executive orders. He tried to amend the Constitution by revoking birthright citizenship. The Constitution, the 14th Amendment, says anybody who was born here is a citizen. Donald Trump said, nope, not in my administration. And he signed an executive order modifying, largely outlawing many kinds of birthright citizenship. Instantly, Brian, and this is what our viewers really need to pay attention to, instantly, state attorneys general across this country, I think a total of 22 of them and others, filed suit to put a stop to it. And at light speed, a federal court judge out in Washington who was appointed by none other than President Ronald Reagan struck this thing down, put an immediate stop to it. And let's take a look at some of what he said. His name is Judge John Coffenauer, more than 4 decades on the bench. He said, this is blatantly unconstitutional. He asked the lawyers for Trump who were in the hearing, where were the lawyers when this executive order was signed? And he said it is so clearly unconstitutional that it, quote, boggles the mind. As I say, he put an instant stop on the implementation of this unconstitutional executive order. For the next 14 days, he ordered more briefings in the case, which is a prudent thing to do so the issue can be fully resolved on the merits against Donald Trump and his administration. And there will be more litigation to come. But Brian, this is a point of light. The federal judiciary, just as it did in 2020 when Donald Trump's dirty lawyers filed more than 60 lawsuits attacking the results of the 2020 election, and every single federal court judge shot he and his lawyers down, including the Trump-appointed judges. Well, now a Ronald Reagan-appointed judge just told Donald Trump and his administration they did something blatantly unconstitutional.
Glenn, just a quick question on the logistics of this. Isn't it the case where normally there has to be somebody who's faced some degree of harm to be able to have standing to even bring this case? And so how could you have, 22 attorneys general bring this case? Or do they have standing immediately because there are people who are having babies every day in all of these states, and so instantly it became an issue where they all have standing to bring suit?
Yeah, what a great question, Brian. Ordinarily, a litigant, somebody who files suit, needs to be able to prove that they have standing. In other words, this new proposed law or executive action has already impacted them to their detriment, to their prejudice, but not always. The reason I say not always is there are a number of doctrines that say, if it is, I'm going to use a non-legal term here, if it's really bad enough, if it's egregious enough, if it is so clearly a violation of the law or the Constitution such that the harm that is about to be suffered is imminent, it's coming, there are doctrines that allow somebody to bring a suit for injunctive relief. So what is injunctive relief? Injunctive relief is basically a stopgap measure that says the harm is coming. It's so plain and clear and obvious that we shouldn't have to wait to have our constitutional rights infringed by this mind-bogglingly unconstitutional executive order in order to bring suit or perfect our right to bring a legal challenge. And so injunctive relief, which is designed to prevent the harm, is, it's not a run-of-the-mill or an everyday or a routine legal proceeding, but the system is equipped to handle it. And injunctive relief to prevent the harm happens, not all that infrequently.
Glenn, in an instance like this where this was one of a slew of executive orders that Trump signed as part of his whole shock and awe campaign. We all knew from the very beginning that he wasn't going to be able to undermine a constitutional, a core facet of our Constitution just by virtue of signing an executive order. And of course, this thing was struck down in court as we expected it to be struck down in court. Do you presume then that he'll keep up what I think?
Brian, I think it's a little bit of both. He is trying to whip up his base, going after the other, and he's going after virtually every other he can think of at this point. This executive order is designed to go after the other that enjoy birthright citizenship as a result of application of the Constitution, and he thought he could do away that by just signing a piece of paper. He knew he couldn't. If there was any lawyer worth his or her salt, they would have advised Trump before he signed it. This is, quote, blatantly unconstitutional and will almost certainly be struck down by any federal trial court judge that is, called upon to rule on this. So what is Donald Trump really trying to do besides whip up his base? He is trying to bubble this issue up to, air quotes, his justices on the Supreme Court. Because even though, Brian, this is exactly what the Constitution, the 14th Amendment, says, it's just 27 words long, guaranteeing birthright citizenship. Quote, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and the state wherein they reside. Boiled down to its essence, all persons born in the United States are citizens of the United States, and that is how the Supreme Court has ruled more than 100 years ago. But Brian, can you envision a Justice Alito or a Justice Clarence Thomas presiding over a birthright citizenship case? And when the lawyers argue to them, Your Honor, the Constitution is clear. It says all persons born in the United States are citizens of the United States. Can't you see Alito and Thomas saying, perhaps even out loud, because they're always saying the quiet part out loud, so you expect me to rule that all persons born in the United States are citizens of the United States in compliance, in accordance with the express text of the Constitution? Hold my beer.
Yeah.
And let's see if any of Donald Trump's, air quotes, justices, the extreme right-wing bloc of the Supreme Court, decide to ignore and contradict the express terms of the Constitution once again, as they have done before for Donald Trump. That is what Donald Trump is hoping will happen here.
Glenn, is he going to have some success by virtue of the fact that he kind of went about this, I think, in a way that he thinks is clever, in the sense that he's not just trying to overturn birthright citizenship just like that. He's basically redefining how it could be interpreted, thereby giving some plausible deniability to his justices who very clearly want to do his bidding.
Plausible deniability in the minds of some, not in the minds of the judges who are going to, let's set aside the Supreme Court for a minute, the federal court judges who have already decided this is blatantly unconstitutional. And Brian, when a federal court judge who's been on the bench for 40 years, put there by a very conservative president, somebody that most of the Republican Party tends to hold up as the measuring stick of conservatism, Ronald Reagan, says things like, where were the lawyers when this blatantly unconstitutional executive order was signed? That does not bode well for the future of this executive order in any court in the land.
Okay, Glenn, one more question. Let's finish off with this. I know that we are sitting here talking about the fact that Donald Trump just lost at the hands of a federal judge in court, but we all know that he's going to appeal this thing up to an appeals court and try to get this thing in front of the U.S. Supreme Court. In the event that the U.S. Supreme Court hears it and they opt to side with Donald Trump and basically disregard the plain text of the Constitution, which this Supreme Court is known to do, and what happens in the event that we have millions of people in this country who are here by virtue of the fact that they have birthright citizenship in accordance with the U.S. Constitution? What happens to those people in the immediate aftermath of that ruling possibly being handed down?
Well, when this executive order was signed, I believe there was a 30-day stay, a pause, a delay in the implementation of it to allow for this inevitable litigation. And then I don't think, if it was found to be constitutional, which it hasn't, it has now been struck down, or at least there has been a stop put on it pending further litigation. I believe it was to go into effect sometime down the road in the month of February. So it would be a prospective violation of the Constitution, the birthright citizenship clause. And so people, unfortunately, would be subjected to being removed from the United States, how they would be removed, how they would all be identified.
Or even where I mean, inherently, these people who were born here don't know any life other than one inside the United States. So it's not as easy saying, oh, deport them somewhere. These people were born here. They don't know any other country. That would be just as crazy as deporting you or I to South Korea or Russia,
Yeah, I agree with you, Brian. I just don't think it has retroactive effect. So the people who were born here and did enjoy birthright citizenship until this executive order was signed and is now being litigated, it wouldn't impact them. That is very small consolation, though, because the Constitution says what it says, and Donald Trump cannot, with a stroke of his little pen, sign away rights that we all enjoy under the Constitution.
Right. Well, of course, we will stay on top of this as this thing inevitably makes its way through the court system. But look, the consolation here, the silver lining here, amid all of this, amid all the chaos that Trump is bringing, is that Donald Trump failed.
So, Trump is the present President of United States of America, and he has to follow some rules. And some of his rules are now will be adopted for the immigrants that comes illegal way into the United States. A top national trade organization has sent letters to three departments in that they believe that Trump is to work for the nationalism.